So we are recording. Excellent. So here we are then, recovering from the Methodist conference, meeting like it has never met before. Leslie, what did you make of it? You've been there to a few.
I've been to a few, yes. Well, it was, as you say, like none other. And I think a lot of us were really quite doubtful about how effective it could be as a conference. And probably that was where the conference office was as well. So we were only going to do essential business, and the timing was pared down really very substantially. I think in the event, we were all surprised how effective we could confer to an extent. We could certainly deal with business. It wasn't, as some of us had feared, just a sense of rubber stamping, but there was some really good, robust debate going on. Clearly we missed all being in the same room. We clearly missed not being able to read what was happening in the room, as it were. But nonetheless, I think we came out of it thinking it was a pretty good job, really. We did pretty well considering, and we certainly covered some really significant business, and I think we attended to what we needed to really well.
So you've been to quite a few conferences like me. Three of our district reps, that was their first opportunity to go to conference. Where are we? David, what was your impression?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, before coming to conference, I was concerned that there wouldn't be enough time for conferring and conversation, but there was. I think I was particularly pleased that we had quite a few EDI motions, that's equality, diversity and inclusion, including one that I was a signatory to, that introduced a new monitoring process for stationing and EDI issues. So that was really pleasing. And I was also really pleased that the young people had a voice at the conference and were listened to and spoke really powerfully to conference. That's always reassuring to see.
And Sandra?
Yeah, I mean, my first impressions were that it was brilliant to be there. It was a really it felt like a privilege to be there, really. But it also taught me how much I don't know, but gave me the desire to find out more and to fill in those gaps so that I'm in a better position to spread that knowledge to the people in the local church.
And Alison, your first go as well.
I had nothing to compare it with, so while Zoom was new to everybody, it was my first time, so it was the first time I'd done it. I was happy that we'd got the WhatsApp group and we had our 9 o'clock early meeting, got lost in quite a few places, missed the fact that I was part of something business. Like Sandra, it was a privilege for me to go. I was very impressed by the young people, how articulate they were, and that they felt very passionate about how our money was invested in fossil fuels and how it shouldn't be, and how they spoke passionately about that. I found singing to myself very bizarre. That's one of the things that I found, and I missed the communal worship. But overall, a really positive experience that I enjoyed. I enjoyed being part of it and being able to take some of that forward and into the local churches.
Normally conference, one of the highlights of conference is the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, the opening, the induction of the new president, vice president, and then on the Sunday, the conference service, reception into full connection, and then the ordination services. This year, that was all truncated and squashed into Saturday. The president is from our own district, Richard Teal. His address, any thoughts about what he was saying to us as a church? What was the most important thing for him, Alistair?
I was going to comment actually not only on Richard's address but also on Carolyn's address as the vice president, and actually the way that those two addresses actually spoke into 3 items of business which actually came through the conference. Because both Richard and Carolyn challenged us in a sense to think about how we are church today and how we will be church. So Richard spoke a lot about our orientation as Christians, the disorientation that we're going through and how we reorient ourselves and actually with some helpful reflections from the Psalms to help us do that. So embedded in scripture and in worship. And Carolyn encouraged us to think about actually how we behave as church. And the three items of business that really spoke to me through the week, that at first might not sound as if they're particularly linked. How we do governance, God for all, which is about how we do mission and evangelism, and then the EDI, the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion discussions that we had as well. And they're all about how we be church rather than do church. And I think this is a really good time to reflect on that. So I was pleased with the way that that Richard and Carolyn in their leadership helped us to do that.
One of the things that was a real sadness, I know, for a lot of people, and particularly those involved, those who were due to be ordained this year. Ian, I mean, you look back on your own ordination, and like me, will remember the feeling of being, received into full connection in front of a large group of people, and then the special service. Feeling for the ordinands who weren't ordained, now redefined in a new way, but nonetheless a meaningful way of acknowledging a stage in their ministry.
I think it was quite different and quite visibly so. Remembering when I stood in front of the conference to be received, that the hairs stand up on the back of your neck when everybody stands up. And of course they didn't have that. But in many ways, we saw more of them than you would do in a normal year as we went through that group of presbyters, of deacons, and of those from other connections becoming part of our church, actually acknowledging the vows that they were taking individually, rather than it just being a group of people sat at the front. They became people, and people in their own right, and having those names. And I can't imagine how they must feel knowing that they're now in full connection, but most of them are not yet ordained. And the fact that we often think that Methodism moves very slowly, but that caused us to think very quickly about what the difference is between somebody in full connection and somebody who's ordained, and start to think about what ministry means to us as a church. And of course, that was one of the reports we didn't take, was looking at what ministry is. And yet fed through so many other things that were around that combination of laity and ordained. But just knowing that at some point in the future, those ordinands will be ordained, and that they will have that celebration just in a very different way than we would have expected or anticipated. It's special that they're still going to do that.
So let's look then at we've already mentioned some of the things that were around, and then Laura, if I come to you, the one of the issues that's already been mentioned already by two people, the whole issue around equality, diversity, inclusion. In particular, mention was made of the reference to the Black Lives Matters movement, which was around us, and then also unconscious bias training. What was sort of there for you, particularly in those reports?
I think that particularly on the first day of conference, we had some really rich conversation around the whole context within which we're meeting, and it really came out in conversations, particularly on that day. But throughout, I noticed. Almost every single report, actually, more so than usually in conference, we're having really rich debate and recognising issues around EDI. Also, as is a passion, safeguarding, the amount of times that, the overlap with safeguarding and the significance of safeguarding and recognising that in everything that we spoke about, I found particularly encouraging, even when we weren't talking about safeguarding specific reports. It was still part of those conversations. I found that particularly encouraging.
And I mean, David, you made reference to it earlier. I mean, the unconscious bias training that's now mandatory in all sorts of levels of the church. it's probably completely new to a lot of people. You know, what's at the heart of it?
Well, I think there needs to be a recognition that there still is racism within the Methodist Church, structurally and often conscious racism. I mean, one of the changes that has already come through is that members of stationing committee, or rather invitation committees, are going to be required to do unconscious bias training. But what the conference introduced this time was a monitoring process that was independent of the stationing process to ensure that EDI concerns are being addressed. Because that's what's really important, because we need to change the culture within the church to make it more inclusive and to ensure that everyone is regarded as equal. And I think what really impressed me at this conference is how high that was on the agenda, how much we talked about equality and inclusion and diversity. And you know, it's excellent as well that the president that we elected, Sonia Hicks, is the first, I think, black woman president that we've ever had, and that's going to be great for the world to see when they look to us to have our figurehead to be from that background.
We mustn't forget another big report that actually committed the church to huge expenditure. Leslie, at Synod we heard from Trey last year, the Director of Evangelism and Growth within the church, and he has brought forward a strategy that conference has now endorsed. What for you is at the heart of what we've committed ourselves to?
Well, at the heart of it, I think, is that there's a phrase that they've been using regularly, which is becoming common currency for some of us: new places for new people. That recognition that we need to find fresh ways for people who aren't affiliated to the Christian faith to be able to explore faith and come to faith, and that very often is going to happen in different contexts to the context that you and I belong to most of the time. But the other really key aspect of it, I think, is the whole issue around church at the margins, to recognise that as a Methodist church, too often we've stepped away from some of the communities that need us the most. And the parts of our communities and our nation, indeed, that are really at the margins because of poverty or because of racial issues or whatever. And a real commitment from the church, which I rejoice in, that says, no, we want to be there, and we're actually going to invest money to be there, and we're going to not just go and be, we're not just going to go and tell them this is how you do church, but we're going to actually encourage them to be church together, and for leaders within those communities at the margins now to rise up and to be equipped. So I think that's really exciting for the future, that we're making that commitment to say we want to change fundamentally who we are as church, and what has been at our centre we want to move to the edge, and what's been at the edge we want to move to the centre.
And is that linked as well to the questions about trusteeship that were also around there in terms of liberating people from some of the old structures?
I think it is, yes. And within this district, we've been talking quite a bit, haven't we, about how we need to find ways to remodel governance, just recognising that sometimes, none of us mean it, but sometimes it just ends up with us spending so much energy. It feels like keeping the show on the road and just keeping things as they have been, rather than setting each other free and then encouraging us to look at who we can be and what we can offer to our local communities. So I think absolutely so. The God for All evangelism growth agenda, the oversight and trusteeship agenda, that they are in partnership together, I think, all about how we fashion ourselves as a sense of movement, a renewing movement that can really be making a difference in our communities. Around our district and around the connection.
So here we are, we're still in this weird time of lockdown, call it what you will. A lot of us haven't got a local church to go back to share some of the experiences of conference, and yet, you know, it is important that we earth it back in each of our communities. So each of us, what's the one thing we would want to say to our church folk about conference and about what we have done? Let's start with Alison. What for you is the one thing that you're going to make sure you folk in your circuit know because you went to conference?
That we are an inclusive church and we're there for everyone.
Sandra?
We were reminded time and time again that best of all, God is with us. And I'd want to take that with me.
Alistair?
That we are a church of a gospel that speaks to the lost sheep, those on the margins, and that actually the 99 could follow the shepherd and help look for them.
Ian?
That our inclusion isn't just about those already in church, but is around that message to the margins and a commitment to new places, to actually look at doing church in new ways. And actually this gap that coronavirus gives us is a good place to ask some of those questions.
Laura?
That during this time when we are in unprecedented times and we're all maybe going to start to ask ourselves questions about what church means, who we are as Methodist people, and we're thinking about in the future trusteeship and some of the reports that we've mentioned, Satsumas are not failed oranges.
Good word. David?
I think deepening our relationship with God through Bible study, through prayer, that really came out of the God for All report, and something which I hope I've been encouraging in the churches that I lead. But I think that's going to be really important as a people dedicated to scriptural holiness. We need to wrestle with scripture, and I think that will enable us to grow closer to God and to better discern his will for us as a Methodist people as part of the wider apostolic church.
And Leslie, having heard all of that, are you encouraged as you look forward, not to your local church, but all of the churches around the district?
I am. I truly am, because at the heart of all of this is just that reminder again and again that we hold good news, and it's good news for us, and it's good news for all the world. And that good news is good news because it transforms our lives, and it's got the potential to transform the world. So let's take heart. Let's take heart. This is good news that we've got.